Well, perfect. I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. My name is Stuart Blumenthal. I'm the Intacct Practice Director here at ETHOSystems. And today we're going to be talking about Sage year-end and Intacct and 1099 training. Everyone else is thinking about, the holiday season, and accountants, they all think about 1099s and year-end. So with that, we'll jump to it. Just a couple logistics. The presentation is 30 to 45 minutes. All the phone lines are muted. And if you have any questions, please use the questions feature in the go to webinar control panel that's on your screen. You might also want to maximize the full screen. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation when we're all done, please feel free to put your email address in the questions feature, and I will make sure that we send you a copy of the presentation when we're done as well. With that, so let's talk about the first process, which is closing the books. So before you close any of the books in the module, you want to reconcile. So the most important thing is reconciling at the end of at the end of the year, these things within each of the modules. Now, think about this. If you actually do these on a monthly basis, that will, it will actually go quicker than doing it once at the end of the year. But these are the things that we recommend you reconciling on a monthly or basis or a yearly basis. The first thing is for those who are using, that are using inventory, we do recommend that you reconcile your purchases clearing or your inventory payable account. So what that is the difference between when you receive in the goods and receiving the invoice. So there's a journal entry that's made, and that's usually a liability account, and you want to make sure that that is cleared out. We also recommend clearing out all open or reconciling all open purchase orders and or commitments in the system. Make sure that they are valid at that point. Good time to clean all that stuff up. We do recommend that you clean up all open in your order entry. Make sure that all your open orders are reconciled and cleaned up. This will also be any type of contracts possibly as well. In the inventory module, we want to make sure that they review the valuation and compare that to the general ledger. So what that means is run an inventory trial balance and make sure that that reconciles to the general ledger. Really important there. For your jobs or projects, make sure that you review your WIP. Make sure that your WIP report matches the general ledger. Again, you should be doing that on a monthly basis, but make sure that that WIP report the balances match, reconcile it, make sure the jobs that are closed are truly closed. That way you can alleviate WIP at that point. It's usually the best practice. And then the last but are not least on the time and expense entry, make sure all your time and expenses have been posted. To go in there and make sure they're all approved, posted, make sure they've all hit the jobs at that point. Within the cash management module, make sure that you complete your bank and credit card reconciliation. So usually, thanks to the internet nowadays, you can pull down a bank statement at, literally at the end of the month and just do a reconciliation right then and there, right off just what's on the bank website. But make sure that you do your bank reconciliations and make sure that your balance sheet then matches correctly. And then the one that we usually have a lot of questions on is AR and AP. So what you want to do is you want to run your AR ledger. And when you run the AR ledger or the aging report, make sure you always check the box based upon GL posting date. This is what's supposed to match to the general ledger at that point. So make sure that your AR and AP, both subsidiary ledgers, your ledgers itself, match the general ledger at that point. And again, make sure that you go in here and say, hey, make sure the GL posting date is checked at that point. That's probably one of the most important things. We get a lot of people and it will be based upon a document date and it won't match. The other issue we do run into is that if someone by mistake posts an entry incorrectly, they might hit AP and AR directly, which we do not recommend them doing. Then those can cause us to get out of whack. So, and again, if you're doing this on a monthly basis, you know that at the end of the year, then it should be pretty straightforward at that point. So the question is, which modules require closing within Sage Intacct? So these are the 5 that require a closing: time and expense, cash management, AR, and AP. So, and then general ledger. Most people close the time and expense, cash management, AR, and AP on a monthly basis, or you should be closing those on a monthly basis. General ledger people have a tendency to leave that open a lot longer. But a couple tips here. One is that you don't have to close the general ledger at the same time as all the other modules, and you can also reopen a period if need be. So, what you're really trying to do is prevent people from posting to a period that they should not be posting to. We all have that person in their office who doesn't watch the dates correctly, might be making some mistakes. So to me, it's important to lock the period. And then if you need to reopen it, you can definitely do so, and then you can close it again. There's no limit to the number of times you can open and close it. And you don't, unlike products like QuickBooks, you don't need to kick everyone out of the system, which is really a nice feature. In addition to that, so if you have, most of you have multiple entities, you can close them at the top level. So if I'm at the top level, it's going to ask me up here, which entity am I going to do this for? And I could, again, choose all my entities, or I choose my entity, but I can do it at the top level or at the entity level directly. So you don't have to go down and do it from each of the entities. But you close each entity one by one. So if you have 200 entities, you're going to be doing this for a while. Also, again, you can close multiple periods at one time. So I can say from this period to a specific period at that point. So if you haven't closed in a while, time to close out your period. So, if I were you today and you haven't closed them in a while, go back, close them all through, like maybe September or whatever your last period was that you're closing everything out through, and then just get cleaned up at this point here to prevent any accidental postings within the system. So again, closing the books prevents users. We talked about books can be reopened. You can close one entity or all entities at the same time. So we talked about that. We talked about if your subsidiary ledger does not match your general ledger, make sure there's no general ledger postings. And one of the screens, like when you're setting up your chart of accounts, down here it says disallow direct postings. I love this turned on for my my inventory account, for my AP account, for my AR account. That way I know people are not making journal entries directly to those accounts and causing the detailed information and get out of whack. If you do need to make a change, you can always uncheck this, make a journal entry, and then turn that back on to prevent accidental postings. The other one, again, retained earnings as well. And make sure security is only set to one person who have access to this. That's something that we do recommend. One of the other things you're going to have to set up in Sage Intacct, a lot of you have this set up already if you're working with us, is that make sure that your 2023 reporting periods have been set up. If not, you can work in 2023, but when you go to run reports or things like that, you might not have all that information on the drill down. So again, go to your reporting periods and make sure that your 2023 reporting periods have been set up. You can do that today. You can go through the end of the through the end of the decade if you want to. Don't recommend that, because then when you go in your drop downs, you're going to see lots of years. But we do recommend getting 2022 or 2023. Gosh, can't believe how time flies. Done as soon as possible. Any questions on year-end month-end posting processes so far? I don't see any, but I will take a 2-second break here and make sure there is no other questions. So I don't see any, so I'm gonna keep on going. So 1099, so for those here in the United States, we've got some clients in Canada. For those here in the United States, obviously 1099s are really important. Sage has made a few changes this year for doing the 1099s, so let's make sure we've got the whole process understood. So when you're setting up a vendor in the system, you'll go to the additional information tab. So this is the additional information tab. And what you'll have the ability to do is put in their 1099 name. You'll click on the button, the form button, and then you'll be able to put in all the what form that you're going to be using, if it's going to be the interest, the dividend one, or the NEC non-employee compensation form at that point. And remember, it's been about several years now, the IRS switched from 1099 miscellaneous to 1099 NEC as an additional one. And where it used to be on box 7, it's now on box 1 of the NEC form for non-employee compensation. So things that are important to put in here, obviously, is the tax ID. As we talked about, the 1099 name, if it's different from the vendor for any reason, you choose the right form. The other thing that's going to be really important is that right here you'll have under your contact list, so that, which is on the 3rd tab when you bring up a vendor, you also have a 1099 contact. So that's where the address is used for. So when you're setting up your 1099s, your contacts, if you have a different address for where the 1099 goes, do not change the contact or the vendor information. Just create a new contact and then assign it in your contacts list for that vendor. One other thing that has changed recently is that when you're setting up a vendor for the very first time, where it says 1099 name, there's now a checkbox that says 1099 eligible. What's weird is that if you hit save, it goes back to the original screen. So if you want to check mark that box, you can, but it really, once you hit save, it then goes back to the way the original form was anyway. So if you're setting up a new vendor, just be careful regarding that. We kind of talked about this, but remember the miscellaneous box 7 has been moved to NEC. So when you're going into the form here, this is where you put the default information. So you put in the form that they're using, the default box, and then you have the ability to put in their initial values. So one thing I always remind people is make sure you get the right year in here. So if you have gone live in 2022, for example, you might not have all the balances in there if it was a mid-year conversion. So this is where you'll come in, put in 2022, and then you can put in the balance that the 1099 should be, or the amount that needs to be added at that point. You can also do negative numbers. So if, for example, there was invoices that should not have received a 1099, you can adjust those invoices and edit those for the 1099s. But you can also just make it easy and put a negative number on this screen, and it makes our lives a lot easier. The one other thing that I always tell people is, we get a couple calls on this like, hey, these invoices are not showing up on my 1099. Remember, 1099s are based upon the actual cutting of the check, or ACH. It's based upon cash. So it's important to remember that if you have not dispersed or have paid that invoice somehow, that 1099 will not show up on, that the amounts will not show up on the 1099. So just keep that in mind when you're putting those together. If you set up a vendor incorrectly when you first get started, you can go in and it will ask you, how do you want to apply the updates? And what this does is that it will go through your transactions, and you have 3 choices. How do you want to, so if you change the form, for example, or you change the box, something like that, it'll say, how do you want to update this? And you say, update all transactions for this vendor for the current year, and prior year, or do not update the previous transactions. So remember this process only updates transactions that are tagged for 1099 treatment. So if you all of a sudden come in the middle of the year and say, hey, I want to do 1099s now for that vendor, it does not go back and fix all the invoices, because those were marked as non-1099able. I think that's a word today. But you want to make sure that those are, so it's not going to fix those, but it will fix if it has the wrong box or something associated to that. So please keep that in mind. One other thing that people ask is that, hey, I got to issue a 1099 to my employees. So you might set up an employee as even your subcontractors might be set up as employees sometimes. So you can go in and within the employee screen, you're able to set up their 1099 name, form, same boxes that you would have under the vendor screen. So keep in mind that again, it does not only apply to vendors, it also applies to the employee screens at that point. So some employees don't get it because they do it through the W-2s. So please, again, consult with your accountant and how you want to handle that. So in previous years, the 1090, there would be a 1099 menu, and then you would have 4 things underneath there. Well, they moved them. So now you have under 1099 under reports, you have your 1099 report. And the reason they did that is to really clean up the menu. So again, this is your reports menu. You shouldn't have everything else underneath there. So you go to reports, 1099, you can print out your 1099 report. Under the main menu, under 1099s, you'll have export 1099 file, which we'll talk about, print the 1096 form, which is the transmittal that goes on the front of it, and then last but not least, to print the 1099 form. And again, we'll discuss these a little bit more as we go forward here. If you do not see them for some reason, that could be a security issue. So make sure you have rights to those menu options. So again, if you don't, check which role you have, go into your role security and make sure you have full rights to those options. That might be why you don't see them on your menu, possibly. So let's start at the beginning. So the 1099 export. So most people who have over 250 vendors need to produce an export file. So what Sage has done, and they've had this year after year, is they have a 1099 export. This puts it into a file format that you can then send to a third party. So let me stress that again. So we get people that call us at the last minute and say, hey, I am trying to send these to the IRS, and the IRS is not accepting my file format. The IRS will not accept the file format from Sage Intacct. You have to go use a third party, and if you go out to the marketplace, which I'll show you momentarily, that's where you take the 1099, that electronic file, and they will do the electronic filing for you, or you can even have them print out your 1099s, things like that. So again, there's some electronic services out there that handle that. This year, they just started partnering. Sage has partnered with a product called Tax Bandits. Sorry, I said the wrong word. And with Tax Bandits. And this is limited to a certain number of customers, first come, first serve. They're not doing this, or they're not releasing this to everyone. So if you're interested in using Tax Bandits, this one integrates directly to Sage. You can go in there, you click on the read the release notes, and then you can go through and purchase the tax forms and all that fun stuff through them. So they do have a integration with Sage Intacct, and that's the one that Sage is using. Again, these are not free, so they will charge for the filing, as well as they will, if you want them to print them out, they will charge you for that. You still have the ability to print them out yourself. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything here. We'll create the 1099 file, which I talked about there, and Sage's partner. And the questions came in: if there's a vendor report that we can download to verify all vendors are properly set up, the 1099 status. So great question. So first thing you do is you can modify your list view. So if you go into your vendor list, you can click on the edit button or the up top and create a new view for 1099s. That's what we recommend doing. It's an easy way of seeing if your 1099s are all set up correctly. I mean, your vendors are all set up correctly at that point. If that didn't answer your question, please let me know. That's the easiest way. So a couple things. So when you're setting up your vendors, and appreciate that question because this actually leads to it. So sometimes people are like, oh man, I always forget to set up 1099s for my vendors. If you go into something called your vendor type, which is a field, which is part of your setup within Sage Intacct, and you associate a vendor type to a vendor, you can default the 1099 type. So if you have a bunch of vendors, like in let's say subcontractors, so you always want to pay via 1099, you can set up a vendor type, and it will automatically default the 1099 information automatically for you. A couple other tips here. So first of all, if you have not done it correctly, if you have not set them up, you can go vendor by vendor. You can also, again, enter in your beginning balances, but they can also be uploaded as well. So there's 3 uploads available, actually 6. One for the vendors, one for the employees to update the 1099 information. There's the ability to update the transactions and or bring in the 1099 opening balances for your vendors and employees. If you have any questions on the imports, please work with us early. We are desperately asking people not to wait till the 31st of January to do these. It's our busiest time of the year with go lives and with 1099s. And we ask that if please try to get this done by the 20th of January, so we're prepared on our side. Going back to the question that you asked before, once your vendors are set up, run the 1099 report first to make sure all your data is accurate. It's a really good report. It makes sure that all your information is in there, and that's what you're going to then submit or print for your 1099s, your 1096s at that point. And one other thing is that when you're printing out your 1099s, if your forms are off a little bit, you can use at the very, very bottom of that screen, there's something called the print offset. This is where you can add a little bit of space on the top and on the left, and it will line up your form pretty well at that point. So what I like to do is print out a 1099. On blank piece of paper, sounds crazy, I do not like to spend money on the forms. So I print them on a blank piece of paper, hold that blank piece of paper in front of the actual form, and then hold it up to the light, and I make sure it's right. So I kind of do that a few times, make sure it's all good, and then at that point, usually you can get them on. Usually the biggest issue that you run into is that if people have unique printer drivers, or sometimes unique printers, they can kind of sometimes make it go askew a little bit. So again, test it early. Don't wait till the last minute to test your forms. In terms of getting your forms, there are 2 places where you get them. If you go out to these websites, and again, if you intacct.dsa-direct.com or www.formsforintacct, oops, my gosh, that's embarrassing, formsforintacct.com, and you're able to get those. You'll be able to get the forms on there. Again, just like the holidays, everyone's getting delayed and things like that, so get them ordered sooner than later. When you're printing your 1099s, please don't forget to change the year. I will tell you that's the #1 problem we get, is that people forget to change the year from 2021 to 2022. We talked about we're not waiting to the end. And then last but not least, you do have the ability when you're printing out the forms, there is a box when you're about to print it out saying these are corrected, and it will then check mark the 1099 corrected box as well. So keep that in mind. Any questions, other questions on 1099s? I realize I went kind of fast, but there's usually a lot of questions, or sometimes there's a lot of questions. Today seems to be very quiet on that. So, again, if you have questions, problems with printing them out, please contact us here. We're happy to make sure that we'll help you through that process. Shouldn't take very long. The biggest thing is just making sure are your invoices and payments that you, more importantly, your payments that you made, are those categorized correctly. If you've been on the system for a couple years, I would tell you that that's probably you're probably got your vendor set up correctly, unless you've accidentally set up new vendors without checking that off. If for those who went live and it's your first time, just make sure that again, most of your data might not have converted with the 1099 data. This is the right time to make sure it's done right. Last but not least, just since we don't have any other questions here, just to kind of finish up the webinar here, we've got webinars scheduled for next year. So again, I will send you the links, or send you this. You can, or if you want me to send you a link, just let me know. But next month we're doing a webinar on Sage Estimating. Sage Estimating is now integrated with Sage Intacct. So for those who are doing estimating and really want it to be integrated with Sage Intacct, we can now do that. We're really happy with those two products connecting with each other. The next webinar in February is revenue recognition tips and tricks. So it's not uncommon for those that have monthly service plans and stuff like that to have to do revenue recognition. On that one, Carol's going to be teaching how to do revenue recognition and some of the tips and tricks associated with that. In March, we're going to work with project contracts. We're going to go teach the new features of the project contracts. By then, there's going to be a few more changes that Sage is going to be making that we're excited about in the Q1 release of Sage Intacct. Remember that Sage does do 4 releases a year. They just did the one in November. The next one should be February, February 2023, the third Friday of the month. And then last but not least, we're going to be doing some retainage tips and tricks in April. So those are our 4 webinars. And one of the questions that are asked is, yes, you can get a copy of the recording on this. Most of our recordings, and I will say we do the best job we can, but most of our recordings are out on our YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com, type in the word ETHOSystems, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see all the Sage Intacct videos that we've done. They go back about a year and a half. So we got everything out there from using ICRW to doing financial reporting to inventory scanning, things like that. So please feel free to go through that. And I will send you a copy of the presentation. And again, if you put your email address in there, I will send you a copy of the presentation. Any other questions for today? So use the little questions feature there. If not, I'm going to wish everyone a great holiday season. It's right upon us, and hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and appreciate your business, and thank you very much.